The Dungarvon Whooper are haunting in the cold woods. The year was 1888, and the Miramichi woods were nothing but a bitter expanse of snow-covered trees and skeletal shadows. For the men who came to this forsaken land, there was no choice but to endure its isolation and bitter cold. The Dungarvon lumber camp was one of the roughest, far from any town, miles from salvation, surrounded by trees that loomed like silent witnesses to secrets that should never be spoken aloud. Ryan was young, perhaps too young for the work, but he had the fire in him, a hunger to survive that few men his age could muster. As the camp's cook, he wasn't just feeding the bellies of the rough and weathered men, but he was the pulse of the camp, always cheerful, always with a laugh. But there was one thing he never laughed about: his money pouch. It was never far from his side. Rumours swirled about how much he had saved, how much he carried with him, and in a camp full of desperate men, rumours are as dangerous as sharp axes. The camp boss, Harlan O'Leary, was a man carved from the same frozen earth the camp was built upon, cold, merciless, and always looking for an edge. It didn't take long before he began to eye Ryan's pouch, his gaze lingering a little too long. Harlan knew the men were restless, frustrated with the grueling work and low pay, and in the silence of those dark winter nights, greed began to fester like an open wound. One morning the camp was quieter than usual. The men trudged out into the snow to fell trees, leaving Ryan behind in the kitchen to prepare their next meal. It was the perfect moment. The scream tore through the camp like a blade through flesh. By the time the men returned, the air was thick with dread. Harlan told them Ryan had fallen ill and died suddenly, claiming he'd buried him before the wolves got to him. But the ground was hard, and the truth was harder to bury. The men knew something was wrong. When they pressed, Harlan's explanation was thin, and his eyes were dark with secrets. That night, the camp was haunted by a sound no one could explain, a terrible whooping scream that echoed through the trees, rattling the bones of even the toughest men. It wasn't the sound of an animal or the wind. It was a scream of anguish, anger, and death, a sound no living creature should ever make. Night after night the screams came, growing louder and more tortured, the echoes bouncing through the forest, louder, wilder, until it seemed they were trapped in a prison of madness. The men barely slept. They whispered that Ryan's spirit had come back for revenge, that his soul had been twisted by betrayal and murder, and now he roamed the woods, demanding justice with every tortured cry. The camp began to unravel. Men fled in the dead of night, their faces pale with fear. Those who stayed claimed they could see Ryan's ghost walking the perimeter of the camp, his form flickering between the trees, his eyes glowing with fury. Harlan, the man who thought he could hide the crime, was now the one hiding, driven mad by the relentless screams of the murdered cook. It wasn't long before the camp boss vanished into the woods, clutching Ryan's stolen money. He was never seen again. In the weeks that followed, the camp shut down, abandoned to the wilderness. But the whooping never stopped. Even now, if you stand near the Dungarvon River on a cold winter's night, you might hear it, the shrill, haunting cries of a young man whose life was stolen too soon. The legend says Ryan's ghost still roams those woods, screaming for the justice he never received, while the man who took his life wanders eternally, haunted by the money that brought death. They call him the Dungarvon Whooper, a name that echoes through the cold, dark forest, a warning to all who would dare to betray trust, steal life, and bury their sins in the frozen earth. But nothing stays buried forever.